Is Bitcoin digital gold? This is a crucial question that you must explore if you are deciding whether or not to use Bitcoin as a monetary store of value. Because if Bitcoin is not digital gold, then what is it? And why are you using Bitcoin for the same reason that you would use gold? Why are you making the investment decision, the financial decision to store value in Bitcoin if it is not digital gold? Maybe you're a speculator, maybe you're a trader, and you're just looking for a horse to bet on. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people who decide to use Bitcoin as a store of value. Why do they consider it to be digital gold? And is this a justified conclusion for them to make? I personally view Bitcoin as a digital store of value, essentially digital gold. It's more nuanced than that, but that's a very basic way that I would describe Bitcoin. So let's examine this question by comparing Bitcoin and gold using an example from my life that I have experienced in relation to something called final settlement assurance. What final settlement assurance is when a transaction is completed, you have custody of that which you traded. The other party has custody of what they traded. The settlement, the trade is complete. There's no chargebacks. There's no third party risk. There's no counterparty risk. You have the item that you traded for. It's in your possession. You can defend it. The trade is over. What happens with certain transactions, however, is that the trade is agreed upon, the trade is initiated, but there is this lag period in which one or both parties have not received the agreed upon collateral. Or worse is one party has received it and the other is waiting for it. Gold solves this problem to the extent that once you have the gold, the trade is over and you know for sure that that transaction is complete. But here's the problem with gold compared to Bitcoin. It is kind of slow, to put it lightly. Now, this is a common talking point amongst those who advocate for Bitcoin or are bullish on Bitcoin. But I'm going to give you a little insight, an anecdotal story that illustrates just how slow gold is at settling transactions internationally, and just how dangerous and how much counterparty risk is involved in transacting with gold to settle a transaction or to take possession of it. The problem with gold is it's really tough to transport it. And this is where Bitcoin shines. But let's just look at this. So, at one point, I had gold stored in a vault in Singapore. And at one point, I decided that I wanted to take custody of it. Now, I'm in North America, so that's essentially sending gold across the world. Now, first of all, if let's just look at scenario one. I have value in Singapore and I want to send it to myself in North America. Well, let's say I use Bitcoin. I initiate the transaction. It sends out. I wait for some confirmations, and by 6 confirmations, I'm happy it's settled. That could take, depending on how much of a fee that I pay, it could take perhaps 30 minutes, or perhaps it could take a few hours. But by the time I get those 6 confirmations on that transaction, I can know for sure that transaction is settled and I have possession of the Bitcoin. I just sent whatever amount of value over the Bitcoin network across the world, and it took between, let's say, half an hour and a few hours, depending on the fees that I'm willing to pay, for that transaction to have absolute certainty that it is settled. Now, let's look at scenario 2, which is what actually occurred in this example. I want to transport value that is stored and secured in Singapore using gold as a store of value, and I want to transport that gold to North America so that I personally have possession of it. This is what I did. So I requested to take delivery of the gold at the website on day 1, and they sent the shipment info to the carrier. On day 2, the carrier picked up the shipment. On day 3, the shipment was in Singapore, just sitting there. On day 4, the shipment was in Singapore. On day 5, the shipment left Singapore. On day 6, it was in Hawaii. On day 7, the shipment arrived in America at a major hub so that's day 7. That's 1 week since I initiated that. I requested to have custody of the gold. It's been 1 week, and it only just arrived in America. Now, it just sat there for day 8. Here's where things get interesting. On day 9, I receive an email. Clearance delay. Detailed broker info is required. Okay, so I wait to see what's happening here, and by the next day I haven't heard anything. So I send an email and I say, what's happening here? Why is the shipment delayed? Finally, on day 12, I receive a response. Shipper or importer must provide designated broker information. Importer must provide a power of attorney or form letter authorizing the carrier to clear shipment. This is day 12. I have no control over the situation here. I don't even know what is happening for several days. As far as I know, the gold has been seized by customs. Finally, on day 13, apparently all is finally reconciled. I don't know what the issue was at customs, but on day 13 it's cleared from customs. And then on day 14 the shipment arrives, and I have attained custody. I've attained final settlement assurance. The transaction is complete. I have taken possession of the gold at day 14 in scenario 2. Day 14, 2 weeks. Scenario 1, Bitcoin, I sent the same equivalent value, and within half an hour, it's done with no counterparty risk. I know for sure that I have the Bitcoin. 2 weeks. And here's the thing, it's not just the time that it took. The time that it took worries me, or worried me, less than the insane counterparty risk involved here. Think of all the people who handled that package of gold, that handled my stored value, my capital, my labor that is being stored in that gold. Think of how many people handled it, and at how many times there could have been an opportunity for someone to steal it. Think about the insane counterparty risk involved when that gold was held at customs. Any customs agent could have decided, well, we're going to hold this indefinitely. We're going to do an investigation. Where is this gold coming from? Why is it going to you? And I would have to justify to them. I'd have to explain to them why I'm taking custody of the gold and how I bought it in the first place. Why was it in Singapore? Maybe they just decide not to give it back to me. Maybe they seize it. Who knows? Forget the 2 weeks. The 2 weeks wouldn't even be as big a deal if not for the counterparty risk. But there is insane counterparty risk. And here's the kicker. Take a look at this picture. This is an actual picture that I took of the package when it arrived. This is the condition of my gold, the package that held my gold, my pristine collateral. This is my store of value that I'm using to save my energy, my excess energy that I have produced over the years. This is the condition that I received it in. I didn't even know what I was going to see when I opened it. I was just hoping it was there. And it was, fortunately. But this example, this anecdote, is simply to demonstrate that Bitcoin is digital gold. It has the property of gold that I desired in that transaction, to take physical custody of the collateral, with ultimately, when I had it in my hand, the settlement was final and absolute with no counterparty risk once I had it in my possession. And that's what I desire when I use Bitcoin. But the difference is, with gold, I have all these layers of risk involved in transporting it across borders, across the world. Not just layers of risk, but really, in my opinion, just insane risk compared to that of Bitcoin. And of course, Bitcoin is much faster. People say Bitcoin is slow, but when you're talking about transporting large amounts of value across borders, what you're looking for is not an instant transaction. You don't care about really the speed. Half an hour, 3 hours, who cares about that? It's more about, is there counterparty risk, and can I be assured that this transaction, once I receive it, is final? With Bitcoin, you absolutely have that. Not only that, but there's none of the counterparty risk. So often we compare Bitcoin against gold, as if gold is the standard to compare against. But I almost see it as, I do the opposite now. I compare gold against the standard of Bitcoin. And in terms of utility and final settlement assurance for my store value, counterparty risk, I mean, gold doesn't even compare. There's no comparison. Bitcoin is just light years ahead of gold. So the real question then becomes comparing Bitcoin and gold in terms of not final settlement assurances, but simply on the store value metric itself. In that case, we could explore that later, but in that case, we would simply say, if you have a certain amount of value you want to store for several decades. Is it better to store it in gold, or is it better to store it in Bitcoin? And that's a different discussion. I think you know where I would land on that, but that's a different discussion. Right now, what we're talking about is final settlement assurance and the ability to transport that value across a geographic and political boundaries, to transport it across the world with no counterparty risk. Viewed from this perspective, not only is Bitcoin the superior monetary technology, I think that gold becomes obsolete. And I think it's a bold claim to make, but I really have to wonder if gold is in the process of being demonetized. Because Bitcoin is simply, it is vastly superior. And to the extent that gold is demonetized, how well is it going to store value in the long term? That is a question that every gold holder is going to have to ask themselves going into the coming years and decades and centuries.